Hello, everybody, and welcome to our another edition of Chai with Coaches. Except for today, it's just going to be Chai with a coach. You've got me, Naheed my co-host and my co-coach and friend is not here today. Drew Biharilal is not feeling so hot today. So today, it's just going to be me, and we're going to talk about anxiety. Right? So one of the things, it doesn't matter whether you're a coach, it doesn't matter whether you're a therapist, the number one thing that people are talking about is high levels of anxiety. And more often than not, we don't really know where that's coming from. We don't really know what's the best way to move forward. All we know is that we feel really crappy when we're stuck in this place of anxiety because it does a few things. Sometimes it just freezes us and it makes us incapable of doing anything, incapable of moving outside of that zone of anxiety, right? That mental hamster wheel that we're always on. But the other thing that it also does is it pushes us into coping mechanisms that we may not particularly care for, right? So when you think about anxiety, and if we're trying to avoid it, what are our normal go-to behaviors? For example, it can be procrastination. A lot of addictions come up in this way, okay? Food addictions, drug addictions, it doesn't matter, but all these addictions. And honestly, what I hear a lot from people calling me up is porn addiction is going through the roof as well. So we've got all of these things going on, and what I wanted to do today was unpack anxiety a little bit. First and foremost, when you think about anxiety, I want to share it in a very personal way, okay? And in a somewhat graphic way, because I really want you to get a picture of what I'm talking about. So when I think about anxiety for me personally, the way I describe it, again, like I said, a little bit colorful language over here, is basically having a stick up my ass, right? So when I am anxious, all I do is I become very rigid. Like my body becomes rigid, my thinking becomes rigid, my focus becomes incredibly myopic. That's all I can think about. And I think about it as like I said, my behavior is literally like a stick up my ass. And I came to this conclusion a few years ago, actually. And I want to explain what I mean by that. So a few years back, my husband and I were traveling, and we went to this hotel. There was this tiny little town, this rural place, and there was a hotel that was the only hotel in this area, and it was filthy dirty. One of the things that I have a strong and high, long stick up my ass, if you will, is about dirt. I get anal, literally, about dirt around me. So there's this only hotel that we can go to, right? And we go in, and the place is, let's just say, not up to my standards, not up to my expectations. The sheets were dirty, the bathroom was filthy, hated it. But there was nothing I could do. There was no place we could go. There was no other alternative. We had to spend the night and then move on to our next destination. And that's when I noticed just how strong my anxiety got. Everything was up here. My husband was trying to talk to me. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to see him. He was just trying to comfort me and hold my hand. I'm like, don't touch me. Don't look at me. Don't say a word to me. And that's when I really understood anxiety not only impacts us in our own emotions, but it also impacts the other person, because it wasn't an ideal situation for him either, but I made it a whole lot worse because of, frankly, my anal attitude. And one of the things that I want you to know about anxiety is that it's related to a belief that we have. And the question is, do you want to do something about it? And this is really important. So many years have passed, okay? And I had a decision. Do I want to actually work on my anxiety related to uncleanly situations? And the answer for me was a no. I don't really encounter that this often, so I really don't worry about it that much. And also there's an underlying belief that, you know what, there's something wrong about me if I accept that situation. That's the belief that I was brought up with. That's how I was trained from a really young kid, actually. that there's something wrong about a person if they want to accept that kind of situation. So step one when it comes to anxiety that you have to be really honest about is this a situation that you want to change? Because if the answer is no, then constantly battling it actually makes the anxiety worse. So you either decide that you're going to accept it as it is, and I'm an unpleasant person when my anxiety hits a high level, or you have to decide I'm going to do something about it. And there's no judgment, but if you're not honest with yourself about that one, you're never going to get out of that loop of anxiety. And then you're going to say, oh, well, you're going to give up. You're like, something's wrong with me or something's wrong with the situation. It's never going to change. No, it's because you have chosen not to make a change. And yay or nay makes no difference. It's about being conscious and aware of what that decision is. So let's go to a completely different situation, okay? So recently, we're trying to get some housework done and, multiple things. I've talked a lot about my dog, Lucy, so we need a fence, changing the roof, a whole bunch of things that need to happen. So we've been dealing with contractors galore. Now, the other thing that I also tend to have a stick up my butt about is control. I like things to be scheduled. I want all the information up front. In other words, in these particular situations, I don't go with the flow, right? I'm a mindset coach. I teach mindset about going with the flow and allowing things to show up for you at right timing, right situation. And I can tell you that in these particular situations, I don't listen to that advice. But as a result of that, I've also parted ways with certain contractors. And after it happening a couple of times, I've decided this is a situation I really don't want to keep continuing. It's a pattern of mine. I get it. I understand it. I'm not going to judge myself for it. But I want to actually do something about it. Right? So when I get into these situations, I have that, stall stick up my butt. I want to keep reducing that stick as much as possible. And by that, I mean start reducing the need for control. Because control from this perspective always comes from fear. It always comes from this understanding that somehow or the other, if I don't jump in and I don't take care of every last detail, there's going to be some mess up and then I'm going to regret it, right? So when we talk about anxiety, I really encourage you to go a little bit deeper. Why are you anxious? Because anxiety is just a top level emotion. We want to go to the feelings. Feelings of fear, right? That's a really strong feeling. So figure out where that anxiety is really stemming from. And then the second step is figure out, what do you want to do about it? Is it worth it to you to actually make a change? Again, be really honest with yourself because it doesn't matter what the answer is. It's just that you're being conscious about whatever that answer is. So lately, I've decided to really take a step back when I work with various contractors. And it's not just contractors, it's just an example of where I tend to jump in and take control. And as I do that, what I recognize is I'm allowing control to go back into the hands of the people that it really needs to be. In other words, I'm letting them take responsibility. And at the same time, I'm accepting of whatever the consequence happens to be. More often than not, the consequences are actually positive because I'm not jumping in, taking responsibility for somebody else's actions, right? But at the same time, if it doesn't work out the way I would like it to work out, I've come to an understanding that, you know what? This was not the right situation. These were not the right people. Something or the other was not in alignment with what it is that I was looking for. So when I think about anxiety, I find that, like I said, the easiest way for me to just close my eyes and picture myself, I'm like, okay, how long is that stick up my butt? Because that tells me that I'm in a place where I have a belief that I don't want to let go of, right? Because the minute I sort of loosen my hold on that belief and then saying, okay, I'm ready to let go of it, the anxiety immediately calms down. So that's one of the things that I would really recommend that you think about when you move forward in your own life, right? What's the underlying reason for that anxiety? What's the underlying emotions? Generally, fear is generally coming from a place of lack, a place of insecurity, right? So what's that reason for being anxious? So get clear about that. And then the second part is get clear of, do I want to do something about it? For things that you notice that you're going to see, or I should say patterns that you notice over and over again, with your coworkers, with your spouse, with your kids, you might decide that, hey, you know what? It's time to make a change. For other things that you don't encounter very often, maybe that relative you see once in 5 years during a family reunion, you might say, not quite ready to deal with that one yet. That's not priority on your list, and that's okay. No judgment around it. So that's the one part of anxiety, right? Why do we have it and what keeps it in place? It's that belief. Like for me, it was very clear, that belief that if I don't jump in and control stuff, then something's going to fall apart, right? So I had to change that belief. So then comes the second part of anxiety. So now you're in the midst of your panic attack, anxiety attack, it doesn't matter what you call it. This is something that I would like you to consider from a behavior standpoint. When you think about that, really, what are your go-to activities? Because underneath the anxiety is a feeling, right? We talked about it. It's usually fear, which means that your body is feeling threatened. Emotionally, mentally, you're feeling threatened, physically as well. And so there's a part of you that's going into coping mechanism. It's self-protection. That's it. That's all it is. And your body's trying to protect you from whatever those negative emotions and feelings that you got. So how many people are really aware of what those negative emotions are? For me, the pattern used to be eating. If I got into a place where I got frustrated, I got fearful, I couldn't see the next steps, especially as I was starting my business. I've been doing this now for 8 years, but in the beginning, I couldn't see past year 1. I couldn't see past year 2. So there's all that fear as to what's going to happen, what's the next step, right? And I would literally use food as a distraction from that emotion. And I remember so clearly early on, I put on something like 15 pounds and I would eat to the point that my stomach would hurt, right? I wasn't even eating for pleasure at that point. I was doing it to literally stuff down those emotions, because if I ate, even if I had a really bad stomach ache, at least it kept me from thinking about all those things that I was truly anxious about. There again is a pattern of what my body, what I emotionally choose to go to as my comfort place. Any kind of addiction that comes up. And addictions are not quite always the way you may think about it. Yes, we have food addiction. I talked about porn. I talked about drugs. But we also have addictions to the way we think. We may not recognize it, but if you have a pattern of spiraling negative emotion, it actually is a dopamine hit. Your brain has become so used to it, it's expecting it, and it almost sees it as a reward. It's a very perverse sort of pleasure center at that point. Because the deeper you get into the negative emotions, the more your brain is expecting it. Now, it feels uncomfortable. I don't want to dismiss that part, but it's what your brain has gotten used to, right? So all of those things become a way of us to be able to shut down to what we really ought to be paying attention and focusing on. So addictions come in a wide variety of ways. And I will tell you, with COVID, it's just given us permission for various different reasons to allow all of that to come to the surface. Nothing got started as a result of COVID. Okay. So many people come to me and say, because of COVID, I'm anxious. And I explain to them as gently as possible, because of COVID, it has been exposed. But you probably had other things going on in your life that masked it, right? So if things were going relatively well in your life, you were able to mask those underlying anxieties. But the moment something shut that down, now you have to focus on all those anxieties. You have no choice. There's no place for you to escape. And that's what COVID did. So I kind of look at it as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it feels painful, but on the other hand, it's really about asking us, inviting us to say, hey, are you ready to make a change? Right? Just like I asked you in the beginning. You find that one thing that gives you a big stick up your ass, and the question is, are you ready to make a change? So this was really what I wanted to share with you about anxiety, just because it's such a common topic. My suggestion is take out a book and start writing things down. Don't filter what comes up, okay? Start by just writing down the things that make you anxious. That's your top level. If you're looking at your pyramid that we talk about, that's just the top level. This is what makes me anxious, right? And then go one step below that and say, okay, what are the beliefs and what are the emotions that come up underneath that anxiety? It could be I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my job. It could be I'm afraid that my relationship is not working. Whatever it happens to be, it requires a little bit of courage and honesty. And frankly, any kind of honesty, in my opinion, requires courage. So get to that next level of what's that thing that is underneath the anxiety. And then the last level, all the way at the bottom, again, is be very upfront with yourself and say, do I want to make a change related to this? And for some of them, it could be a very clear yes. Some could be a very clear no. And then others could be not yet. And the most important thing in this process is really not to judge what's coming up for you, because then that's going to take you right back into that anxiety loop, right? We're trying to bring that down. We're trying to bring clarity. We're trying to bring light into this thing that we just kind of amorphous feelings and that we don't know how to quite identify. We're wanting to bring light into that part. And the minute we judge ourselves, or the minute someone else judges us for this vulnerability, we shut down. So with that in mind, I'd really hope that you look at anxiety a little bit differently, right? Just again, be clear about what the underlying issue is. Be clear about whether you want to do something about it or not. And if the answer is no, let it go. Just be okay with it. Just know in those moments you will be anxious, right? Stop fighting it. Remember, every time what we resist will persist. All right, guys, so I know that this was kind of short and sweet without my co-host, Drew Biharilal. So I hope that this was very helpful for you. And take some time and do this exercise. And if you find it to be useful, reach out to one of us and post it if need be and give us your feedback. We'd love to know how this is helping you. These are exercises Drew and I use with our clients. Oftentimes we do it ourselves as well. So we'd love to be able to get your feedback on how much this helped you. So thanks very much and looking forward to seeing you next time.